I've just woke up in a fucking steaming mood, yeah? Because I live in a shithole!
Ranking all the Legion traits for Horus Heresy 3.0, Part 3. It's the main characters. I mean the Sons of Horus. I mean the Lunar Wolves. I mean, it's these guys. Look at them. We've got a lot to cover and some points from the last video, so stay tuned to the end and I'll chat about the comments from the last video. Now with that out of the way, my name is Mechanid. Let's get started. The Legion trait, Death Dealers. Ever on the offensive, the Sons of Horus wasted no opportunity to attack their foe, unleashing salvos of fire even as they closed in for the kill. To simply best an enemy was not enough. They must be utterly defeated before victory could be claimed in the name of Horus Lupercal. The Sons of Horus make volley attacks at full ballistic skill. When a model with this special rule makes a volley attack, it is not required to fire snapshots. A short and simple rule that encourages you as a player to get stuck into melee by rewarding you with better shooting when you make your volley attacks as you dive into combat. Volley attacks are made during the assault phase, after any setup moves have been made where both sides get to shoot at each other with pistols and other assault weapons as the two sides close in. These attacks are made as snapshots, unless you're a Son of Horus that is, and can only be made with weapons with the assault trait. Now, since volley attacks are made by both the charging unit and the charged unit, this gives you far more opportunities to make these attacks. You can trigger this in both your turn and your enemy's turn, which is great. If volley fire is being triggered frequently enough in both your turn and your enemy's turn, you can potentially get far more damage done with your accurate volley fires. And it also gives you more defensive options, and can act like a free Overwatch reaction for your assault weapons, making those longer charges into the Sons of Horus units a far bit trickier and less appealing. It can also save you reaction points that you would otherwise spend on the Overwatch reaction, as your guys will have the Legion trait to fall back on as a lesser alternative. And since you are making these at your full ballistic skill, while your opponent is making snapshots, you've got a significant edge there. Because of this, you are more likely to get hits, more wounds, and more kills, which in turn has the effect of taking away models and the attacks they would otherwise throw at you in the fight phase. This means that you're stacking the combat in your favour before it even occurs. Especially with big units of despoilers, tactical marines, or assault marines, throwing upwards of 20 bolt pistol shots at full ballistic skill is not to be underestimated. However, because volley attacks can only be made with weapons with the assault trait, this will greatly limit what you can actually fire with, so think things like bolt pistols, shotguns, or plasma pistols. Now, while this rule only does refer to assault weapons, this can mean that units without pistols or assault weapons can be left in the dust. However, units with the Implacable Advanced Special rule treat non-heavy, non-ordnance weapons as assault weapons, so things like combi bolters on Terminators or veteran heavy support squads with disintegrators. This also means that things like the Justarian Terminators with their Banestrike combi bolters can throw a huge number of potentially breaching shots out in both your turn and your opponent's turn. And the fact that you are firing at full ballistic skill, it's almost like you're double dipping with all of your shooting phases. Really good. Now, I would still recommend taking a look at your weapon loadouts, as there may be some surprising additions to the Death Dealer rule, such as Archaeotech pistols, which also have assault and are pretty mean with their breaching 3 up, and Disintegrator pistols, which are just disintegrator weapons. It's a shame you can't take Inferno pistols for some cheeky melter gun shots though. Even so, with the ubiquity of things like bolt pistols, you're probably going to have something to shoot at full ballistic skill when you're making your volley fire action. However, and my other big issue with this Legion trait is the scenario where, if a setup move brings an enemy unit into contact with the unit they are charging, then neither of them gets to make a volley attack. Now, this can only happen when the charging unit is almost touching your unit, or vice versa. However, in this case, neither player gets to make their volley attacks or Overwatch reactions. Now, on one hand, you're dodging getting shot, but this also means you're missing out on your Legion trait. When your opponent's snap shooting and you're firing on full ballistic skill, this is going to hurt you far more than it hurts your opponent. And, depending on your Legion matchup, there's the chance that the person you're about to fight is going to get there, even with jet bikes or fast-moving jetpack troops. And units like Assault Marines or jet bikes, you're looking at a 4-inch setup move, which is very doable. And in these scenarios, where the setup move that either you or your enemy makes brings the two of you into contact, you as the Sons of Horus player will not get to make your volley attacks, and this means that your Legion trait doesn't trigger, and you get nothing. In this way, it's possible for a clever opponent or poor positioning on your part to completely negate your Legion trait. And while it may seem small, it's not something to overlook. Overall, I find the Death Dealer's trait to be a good workman rule. It'll pull its weight and give you a few extra kills here and there, which can potentially tip the combat into your favour. However, unless you're packing a few plasma pistols or disintegrator pistols, or you're going really heavy on large squads of say despoilers or tacticals, it's unlikely that this will give you the big edge that you may be looking for, and melee fights are likely to come down to who's better suited in close combat, and probably not the effect of this rule. Also, those edge cases where you don't get to make your volley attacks can also negate your Legion trait, and as such, you may be left without the edge that you may need to swing combat in your way. In short, a decent rule, and a strong one, and while it may not seem super impactful in the short term, I think that over the course of the game, it is likely to help you grind out an advantage. I'd say a solid 7 out of 10. The Gambit. Merciless Strike. When this Gambit is selected, the controlling player's model gains the Phage Toughness special rule. Phage is an interesting mechanic, similar to the Radphage special rule of the editions past. If a unit suffers a wound from a weapon with the Phage special rule, all models in the targeted unit reduce the characteristic mentioned, in this case toughness, by 1 for the rest of the game. This effect does not stack, so you can only have a characteristic reduced by 1 to a minimum of 1, but you can have multiple stats affected, so let's say strength and toughness, both reduced by 1. This is a pretty cool rule that favours going into round 2 and beyond, since the Phage effect is applied after suffering the wound, so it won't do anything for you in the initial fight. This reduction of toughness is less helpful on high strength weapons like Thunderhammers or Power Fists, but on lower strength things like say Paragon Blades, Power Swords and the like, Lightning Claws included, this will help those weapons more. This is an okay Gambit, but I would always weigh this up against the fact that other Gambits that may just allow you to just kill your opponent faster and more effectively than trying to drag the fight out into a place where the Phage Toughness rule will be the deciding factor. Gambits like Seize the Initiative, giving you an extra focus dice and letting you pick the highest, giving you a much higher chance of going first and just killing your opponent before they get a chance to kill you. That first option where you can just kill them is always preferable, and it reduces the chance of them hurting you in return. Now don't get me wrong, this Gambit makes killing the person you're fighting easier on subsequent turns, but that's also opening you up to the potential of getting you killed on those subsequent turns as your opponent gets to strike back at you. Now you may have scenarios where you phage them on the first round of combat, and then on the second round of combat you go to Seize Initiative to try and get in there with a lower strength weapon and exploit that weakness before they have a chance to attack you, but that's a lot of setup and a lot of things that need to go right for you when you could just, I don't know, smash them on the head with a Thunderhammer and just kill them straight away. As such, I'd probably use any Gambit that gives you a better chance of just killing your opponent quicker in the first instance and reducing the opportunities where your opponent can kill you. But on the upside, since this effect lingers for the rest of the game, you can potentially have a Master Sergeant who can just take the challenge like a champion, take one for the team. You can have him step up and knife the enemy champion, inflicting them with Phage, and then have another better combat character follow up and finish off the wounded character. The Advanced Reaction. Warrior Pride. If you just want to completely disrespect your opponent, then you can use this Gambit. When your opponent issues a challenge against you, you can trigger this reaction. If the challenger's base weapon skill is lower than the base weapon skill of all models in the reacting unit, then you can choose to not accept the challenge. If you do so this way, the challenge phase immediately ends and the model does not gain the disgraced tactical status. For one reaction point, you can snub your opponent's challenge, which can help prevent the nuisance challenges which are often used to delay tooled up combat characters. In essence, you can use this reaction to stop your melee blender characters from getting stuck overkilling one guy, and can instead throw their attacks into the main body of the enemy unit and in turn get a bigger bang for your buck. A good example is using this on characters like Horus or Abaddon, so they don't get bogged down chewing on a sergeant when they should be smashing the squad to pieces. This means you won't waste a turn of combat overkilling one model, and those monster melee characters can push their attacks into the main body of the squad. Also, being able to dodge the disgrace status, which halves the weapon skill and leadership of a model that refused the challenge for the duration of the assault phase, is also a tasty cherry on top, meaning that the character that dodged the challenge is free to throw their attacks on the opposing unit at full strength, meaning you won't lose out on any melee output there. However, the big downside of this reaction is the fact that you need to have all your models that could accept the challenge be above the challenger's weapon skill. So in mixed squads with several characters, it may be harder to trigger than you think, despite how thematic that is. And this is because of the relative uniformity of Space Marine stat lines. It'll greatly limit your chances to use this reaction since most combat characters are rocking around weapon skill 5 or 6, outside of things like Praetors and champions snubbing lesser warriors. I would bet that you want these guys in a challenge to snipe the opponent's champion. So in short, this is a silver bullet reaction that you may want to save a reaction for if you can predict the perfect scenario to use it in. The additional detachment, the Supremacy Cadre. Aside from having an absolutely baller name, the Supremacy Cadre gives you a load of extra slots. 2 troop slots, most of which are prime slots, 1 elite slot, and 1 heavy assault slot. Now, unlike other Legion-specific detachments, these have no restriction on which units of their specific type you can take in the relevant slot, giving you as a player much greater freedom. With half of the detachment being prime slots, this also gives you opportunities to farm more prime slot bonuses, and all of the slots in this detachment are all in relative types for the classic Shock Assault Sons of Horus list, Justarian Terminators in elites and Reavers in heavy assault. I like this detachment a lot as it is very flexible and has 3 different unit types, so whether you're taking this to just spam more despoilers or tacticals in the troop slots, or bring in the big boys like Legion Terminators or Justarian, or even just destroyers or veteran assault squads, you've got lots of options here. A solid and fitting detachment for the Sons of Horus. Armoury. The Sons of Horus have an extensive armoury, especially considering some of the other legions. First, Bane Strike Bolters. Any command or champion subtype can swap its bolter for a Bane Strike Bolter for 5 points, or swap a Combi Bolter for a Bane Strike Bolter for 5 points. Seekers can swap their Kraken Bolters for Bane Strike Bolters for free, and veteran tactical squads can upgrade to Bane Strike Bolters for 5 points per model. Same as the Alpha Legion, with shorter range and breaching 6+ over regular bolters. Not bad, but with only breaching 6+, you'll be fishing for those 6s, and outside of massed attacks, you're probably not going to get that much return over regular bolters. And because you have to get closer, it is possible for other Marines with regular bolters to outrange you, so consider that. Now, Bane Strike will do a lot of work for you on things like Justarian Terminators, who all have Bane Strike combi bolters, especially when you get your volley attacks, since Terminators with Implacable Advance treat these non-heavy, non-ordnance weapons as assault weapons, and as such, you can make volley attacks with them. Even just 5 guys gives you 20 shots, which can absolutely decimate power armored troops, and even with that breaching, you can potentially threaten to bring down a Terminator or 2. Overall, Bane Strikes are good, but you need to throw out a lot of shots to really get the most use of that breaching 6+. However, even with these upsides, I'd recommend skipping Bane Strike Bolters on characters, unless they are rocking around with a unit who also has Bane Strike and you've got the points to spare. I'd also say leave Seekers with their Kraken Bolters, as Kraken Bolters have almost double the range, Precision 4+, and Shot Selector, which lets you choose between either Panic 1, Breaching 4+, or Suppressive 2, meaning that if you want that armor penetration, you're better off just choosing a Kraken Bolter anyway. If you do want to go heavy onto Bane Strike Bolters, I'd recommend a 10-man veteran tactical squad, but even so, it's still a hard sell when you compare them to, say, Disintegrator rifles. It's just too bad that Legion Terminators can't take Bane Strike combi bolters. That would make for an excellent infantry shredder Terminator use, but I guess the Justarian just stole them all. The Carceran Power Axes. Any model with a Power Axe can swap it for a Carceran Power Axe for 5 points, or a Carceran Power Tabar for 10 points. Getting Shred 5 up or 6 up onto a Power Axe is nice for a bit of reliability, but at these costs, I don't see a space for these Carceran weapons to exist against something like a Lightning Claw or a Thunder Hammer. Especially the Tabar just looks to me like a strictly worse Thunder Hammer. The only niche I can see for these guys is where you want to hit a bit harder, but you don't want to suffer as severe of an initiative modifier. Now, I like that these options are available to any model with a power axe, so those big squads of veteran assault squads can all rock Carceran power axes, which is nice. However, this will get very expensive very fast, since you first have to buy the power axe before upgrading it, and this cost will only compound as you outfit a full squad with Carceran weapons. Overall, I'd leave the axe and the Tabar at home and go with the tried and true Lightning Claws or Thunder Hammers. In addition to these pieces of kit, the Legacy PDF also introduced a couple of bits of kits for the Reaver Attack Squad. Any model may exchange both its bolt pistol and a chain axe for a pair of Lightning Claws for 10 points per, and the Reaver Chieftain can take Melter Bombs for 10 points. Now, normally I'd Whirlwind Slam a pair of Lightning Claws over a pistol and a chain axe. However, given the strengths of the Sons of Horus Legion trade, losing a pistol is much more of an issue than other legions. Not to say that Lightning Claws aren't good, but 10 points per man on a squad that can go up to 20 men in size is not a small investment, and it's one you'll have to weigh up in addition to losing your pistols. Also, since you swap out both your weapons, you aren't able to pick up a special weapon or any of the other Legion pistols. Next, while Melter Bombs can give your Sarge some much needed reach against vehicles and armor, however, I'd say if you're sending your Reavers against tanks, you've either run out of targets or you're in a bad spot. I'd say leave the Melter Bombs off and leave the tank busting to the anti-armor guys. The Decurion Legate Linnaeus.
The word means butcher in Latin.
I fucking love this guy. An upgrade for a Predator, Kratos, or Sikaran tank, specifically ones without a pintle weapon, with points and restrictions based on the tank chassis. Purchasing the Linnaeus gives you a Bane Strike Bolt Cannon, a supercharged heavy bolter, and the Brutal Enforcement special rule. This rule lets you reenact my favourite scene from Enemy of the Gates and shoot your own men in the back when they run away. Basically, at the start of the move subphase, you can select one of your units that has the routed tactical effect and that is within 12 of the model with this special rule. If you do, you immediately make a shooting attack against that unit, and once that attack has been resolved, the unit removes the routed tactical status. You're basically like slapping them to get them back into line. This special shooting attack doesn't cause any leadership checks. I love the flavour of this rule, and I really like the utility of being able to remove the tactical status before the unit in question has time to act, meaning you could pull squads back from the board edge and still have them act relatively normally. Also, since this rule only cares about you targeting and shooting at the routing unit, means that if you get lucky and whiff all your shots, sending the bullets over the fleeing soldiers' heads or into the ground at their feet, then you don't even have to kill any of your boys to remove that routed tactical status. Now on the flip side, this will hurt when you lose a Marine for this shooting attack, so using it on Auxilia or Militia allies would be my preference. Now, while the Bane Strike Cannon is a good gun in of itself, rocking more shots, better strength, better AP, and better damage, and breaching 6+ over the standard heavy bolter, but for the points cost, and outside of a flavorful army running lots of Inducti or Auxilia, I don't see a use for this upgrade, as much as that saddens me. Now don't get me wrong, the breaching 6+ and damage 2 is nice, especially when it snags a Terminator, but if you're not hitting those 6s, I don't see how this weapon measures up well against, say, a multi-melter. Even at its cheapest, at 25 points on the Predator or Sakaran, you're still competing against things like a pintle-mounted multi-melter, which cost the same, or even the Havoc Launcher, which is another good source of stun 1. Also, the fact that the Brutal Enforcement shooting attack is limited to 12 inches means that you have to be pretty much on top of the routing squad. So this is rather inflexible as support rules go. If you are going to take this upgrade, I'd say go cheap and slap it on a Predator tank and zip it around the battlefield, whipping the dogs back into line. One last thing, I'm gutted that you can only use the Bane Strike Bolt Cannon for this special rule. I think it would be an absolute meme if you could turn your own guns like a Kratos main cannon on your own guys. The Prime Slot Benefit, Martial Supremacy. One model in the unit selected to fill a Prime Force Organization slot with this Prime Advantage gains the Champion subtype and the Duelist Edge 1 special rule. This can only be taken by an Elite's unit. Doubling down on the melee theme, and while the buffs from this rule are nice, this is in many ways worse than Master Sergeant. Duelist Edge is nice, but compared to getting +1 attack, +1 weapon skill, and +1 leadership and the Champion subtype, Martial Supremacy doesn't hold up very well, especially considering that Master Sergeant can be taken for any Prime slot, whereas Martial Supremacy is limited to only Elites. Now, one upside of Martial Supremacy is that you may select one model in the unit, which means that instead of being forced to upgrade a Sergeant, you can upgrade a random Mook to throw into challenges. Or in veteran units that you can individually upgrade separate models, you could make another tooled up combat character. This also means that any units that don't have Sergeants, like the Justarin, can make use of this special rule, whereas they can't make use of the Master Sergeant Prime slot benefit. Other than that, I would pass on this Prime slot benefit and instead stick with Master Sergeant, unless you somehow already have a Master Sergeant and you absolutely need more duelists in a given detachment. The comparison with 2.0. The jump from 2nd to 3rd edition has still kept the Sons of Horus as a melee-focused faction, but shifted the focus from just straight-up melee fighting into more of a close-range, gunfighting, brawling, shock assault specialist that the Sons of Horus are. Now, I do think that the 3rd edition trait is an overall stronger trait. Given the new mechanics of 3rd edition, it takes better advantage of them. Due to the Volifier mechanic being triggered nearly every time a charge is declared, it's easier to activate, and with rules like Implacable Advanced, it gives you an incentive to build around select weapons to maximize the number of shots when the Volifier goes off. It also gives your opponent more room for counterplay, by getting in close that they can try to dodge the Volifier altogether. This to me implies a deeper level of gameplay experience, where both you and your opponent are trying to maneuver around one another. Also, with the loss of instant death, keeping the same trait from 2nd to 3rd edition would be a massive nerf for the Sons of Horus, especially with the introduction of the damage stat. So I do think this change was for the best, considering the mechanics of 3rd edition. Now, I am a bit miffed that the old Lunar Wolves have lost their extra vehicle ram attacks, which is something I think would be very easy to bring in, and honestly, I don't think it would be that overpowered if you just slapped that trait back onto the 3rd edition trait. And I think it would also give Sons of Horus players more reason to run vehicles, not to mention how fun it is just to crash cars into people. In regards to how well this trait represents the Sons of Horus from a lore and story angle, I like it. I think this represents the Sons of Horus well. better even than the 2nd edition trait does. To me, the Sons of Horus were more of a gunfighting legion, a legion that was really good at the basics, and because of that, they could win out against much more of the specialized legions, kind of like a reverse of the Ultramarines. This is as opposed to the more highly melee-focused legions like the World Eaters or the Blood Angels. The Sons of Horus still had that warrior spirit and strong melee orientation, but it wasn't so focused around purely melee close combat, and I do think that the 2nd edition trait overlooked their excellent gunfighting skills. Conclusion. While it can be very helpful, the Death Dealer trait can also be turned off by enemies being too close to you and touching in with their setup move. However, those are incredibly edge case scenarios, and 9 times out of 10 it'll work for you enough to pay itself back and then some. Also, it brings Legacies units into the light, things like veteran heavy support squads, and that's always a plus in my book. All the more reason to check out the Legacies PDF and bring some of those units across into the forefront. While I like the thematic and potential synergies of the Gambit, I don't find many uses for it as opposed to the Gambits that just let you kill your opponent quicker. I don't think you'll be using this Gambit anywhere near enough, and with the reduced turn count of 3.0, you'll have less combats to fight overall, and less shooting attacks to make, so there'll be less overall chances for you to get the use out of this Phage Toughness special rule. Now, the Sons of Horus have a large armoury with some interesting side grade options. However, I think they suffer from a compounding points cost issue where if you want to use a lot of them, like the Caster and Power Axes, on a full squad, it'll get very expensive very fast, for not anywhere near as much return as running things say like Lightning Claws. On the flip side, things like the Decurion Lanius, there's some fun and fluffy stuff there, which shows the character of the Legion and also gives you as the player some alternative tactics on the battlefield, which I very much like to see in a Legion's armoury. Overall, I quite like how the Legion trait represents the Sons of Horus as a close-range, merciless gunfighting force, charging into melee, blazing away with all their guns on full auto. I do think this rule is a better representation of how they fight as opposed to the 2nd edition trait, which just made them tougher in melee, which, while being a very good rule, I don't think represents them as well as the 3rd edition trait does. For their aggressive and thematically resonant rule, I'm putting the Sons of Horus in a solid A tier, with only the rather lackluster armoury, weak prime slot benefit, and rather situational reaction keeping them out of an S tier. Even so, with the power of their Legion trait and some clever list building options, you can make a really scary close range shock assault list with way more shooting than your opponent will be ready for. I think the Sons of Horus are well positioned to be a strong Legion in this edition. That's it for the Sons of Horus for the moment, and what do you guys think? Should they be higher up, or do you think I've missed anything that would otherwise change their ranking? And while we mull that over, let's take a quick look at the other 2 Legion vids and see a couple of the comments and the points you guys raised. Going in reverse order with the Alpha Legion, and Sabodin Khan, I hope I'm getting that right, makes a point that the Legion Tactica doesn't apply to vehicles, and this is a big dyslexic point on my end. I'm so used to having the vehicles get the Alpha Legion trait from 2nd edition that I just glossed over that. Now, this does have a knock-on effect of making the Alpha Legion trait a fair bit weaker as your vehicles won't benefit from the trait, and as such, don't get any of the upsides. The other point is brought up by Dr. Hitchhiker 5492, who brings up a point about power daggers, how you can take them alongside a melee weapon. If you're on a character that has both a pistol and a bolter, you can swap them both out for a power weapon and a thunder hammer, and then you can exchange the power weapon for a power dagger. As he points out, this will leave you without a gun, but it's completely doable. As with before, this is a good correction, and I'd not really considered it because I personally like to have a character with both a gun and a melee weapon. However, this is still a good point to bring up, and can give you an idea that the 3.0 rules can be forced to bend in such a way to produce effects similar to like what we had in 2.0. And finally, to round us out, we finish off with the Raven Guard with Actung Nate, great name, giving a correction on rending, which is just another misread on my behalf. And while I hold my thoughts on the prime slot benefit to be true, it does bring up a good point about how the game and opinions on the facets of the game overall evolve. So good stuff there. And the traitor Raven Guard idea I really, really like. With all that said and done, there's only one thing to go over, and that's which Legion should we look at next. So stay tuned for more. My name is Mechanid. Thanks for watching. It's not to be underestimated. Fucking plain. However,